Meisha and Martin, quite a few things, you know what I'm saying, between speaker, consultant, executive, dope overall person, vice president of people research at Workhuman. How are you doing?
You know, I'm doing all right. It's a time. I've got a lot going on, and I'm super busy,
Mm-hmm.
but I'm doing things that I'm deeply passionate about. And so it's kind of a good stress, right? Like, because you care about getting this right.
Yeah.
And so overall, I'm grateful. I'm happy. I'm energized. How are you doing?
You know what? I'm doing okay. I think the world is being run by a bunch of oligarchical maniacs, and so
Mm-hmm.
that creates a certain sense of unease for me. And then, but I'm also really hopeful and thankful. I have some
Mm-hmm.
children. I have twins on the way, as we've talked about, right? Or maybe I didn't tell you.
That's, you did not.
I'm so sorry.
Congratulations.
I thought we had talked about that. I wasn't trying to casually drop brand new news on you in the middle of the pod. I thought we had. So I got so yeah, no, so we're expecting twins here in the summer, and or yeah, the summer. And so, you know there's some hope there, but there's also genuine anxiety as you just think about how the state of the world. But the world has never been perfect.
Yeah. I haven't said this to you yet,
Mm.
but the last time I spoke to you, you said something to me that I've been thinking about since you said it, and
Mm.
I've been repeating it too. And what you said is what I'm excited about in this time is that we will now know who's true to this and who's performative.
Yeah.
And I think you're right, right? It's a tough time, but
Hmm.
it also presents some unique and interesting opportunities. So I'm here for it.
Yeah. I mean, man, you get into it because I was gonna as I think about your background. You have a PhD in IO Psych, and
Hmm.
you've done research on workplace attitudes, or diversity attitudes in the workplace, and I do want to hear more of your perspective, right? Because I've talked to so many people. I think about Living Corporate. We've been around since 2018, and I
Hmm.
remember I've talked to certain HR practitioners, quote unquote DEI practitioners, and they were like, "Hey, look, when I started this work, it wasn't called DEI; it was called affirmative action. Like before,
Okay.
before that,
Hmm.
before that was deemed, because like now affirmative action is now has been bookified like DEI has been bookified, but there was a point in our time when affirmative action was not a derogatory term; it was the actual thing, right? It was what how we call what we call DEI today.
My master's thesis was on affirmative action attitudes.
See, okay, so my question is just this is so
Hmm.
fire because I'd like to hear your perspective on, and yes, you're right, like kind of a little bit of behind the scenes content, a little bit of behind the scenes sausage making. We did talk about the fact that I do believe this landscape continues to grow increasingly critical of anything that is beyond it being pro black or pro woman
Hmm.
or pro
Hmm.
disabled or pro queer or pro trans. I believe this landscape is growing increasingly hostile to anything that is pro worker, right? Like
Yeah.
I think like it feels like, and dang, and I honestly, Dr. Mark, you getting us right into like the middle of the conversation, but that's fire because
I'm
now,
ready.
no, no, no. So here's my I think I'm going to talk about this, but I do want to talk about I want to talk about more of your work as well. But I'd love to get your
Hmm.
perspective. I believe that more and more, like DEI and affirmative action before it, they were really like pretexts for worker and worker and employer relationship, right? But it was like
Hmm.
it was like the veneer of language and like vernacular that we would use to not
Hmm.
necessarily have that conversation of like, hey, no, we're the right, okay, interesting.
Hmm.
So like, because I think it's a much more like as uncomfortable as diversity, equity, inclusion is to discuss to some people. I think it's
Hmm.
much. I think it's much more. I think it's much more. I think it's easier for someone to have a discussion about, oh, well, this is why everybody has to belong, blah, 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 than it is to talk about like means of production and like who 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 should have
Uh-huh.
equity, like having like more again like class discussions.
I agree.
And I think that like
It's so
yeah,
funny
yeah,
you
go.
say that because class, it was a variable in my thesis too when I looked at affirmative action attitudes. But you're right, nobody talks about that, and that's why even in the DEI space, we don't talk about power and status as much as we need to, because those are important conversations. You know, I'm talking at South by Southwest this year, and I was on a panel last year, and I talked about even these companies that are going into other countries, but the power structure remains in the US. So you've got most of your employees in India or China, but the power structure still is in the US. And so I agree with you. There is a conversation to be had about things like that, and it's not happening. There is data is playing a role in that as well. I have used things like social network analysis to see where the power lies in an organization, but not many people are doing that work and having that conversation, unfortunately.
I think it's well, and I think that's I also believe that's by design, right? Like I think it's easy.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's easier. Like again, like let's say white baby boomer male executive. Would you
Mm-hmm.
rather have a discussion about how we can stand up a black employee resource group, or how this entire working class is like needs to collectively organize for a greater share of equity in this company that you own, right? Like
Yeah, that's a tough one.
one of
Yeah.
those one of those discussions one of those discussions might be annoying, but like
Mm-hmm.
there's probably like three or four more logical steps before we get to like class solidarity and power sharing and like reimagining who owns and controls the means of production at
Mm-hmm.
Lowe's or AT&T or Visa or whatever. So like let's instead
Yeah.
talk about why diversity is the party and inclusion is being invited to the dance, whatever people be saying. You know, like it's easy.
Vernay Myers people. That's the people that said that.
Like it's like that stuff because that's cute and that's fun and frankly it's also like not threatening to any real power structure because like you know and also like when you think about when it comes to like giving up capital to control, you're not like yeah you might put
Yeah, I think several things can be true at the same time,
mm,
and I think of it as an intersecting Venn diagram, right?
mm,
So we can think about, people who are essential and contributing to our so much to our economy, so much so that we call them essential, right?
mm,
Don't have the means to live and feed their families.
right,
Those are separate, but they're also related.
right,
So I think all the things are true, right?
100%. Now like getting to the work that you do, you've already alluded to it in terms of like your the subject of your research as well as just the work that you do
Yes.
today, right? I can't tell you, and I'm biased, obviously, like all human beings are. I'm my own mind though, and say, I'm coming from, and when I was in industry, I was in, or when I was, working for someone else and not doing living corporate full time. I'm coming from change management consulting, human resources,
Mm-hmm.
org transformation, and even and there was some go to market work in the tech sector as well. But the point is like any people oriented things that we were doing, very little of it was led by amassing and analyzing large sets of data. Right
Yeah.
now, you might gather qualitative data through listening sessions, but let's say if there's an
Mm-hmm.
organization of like 10,000 people, you do a listening session, you do 3 listening sessions, 30 people a piece. Okay, you got 90 people. Is that really representative of anything? Unless, you know
Right,
what I
right,
mean?
right. Mm-hmm.
And so I can tell you over time, I grew just very disillusioned with the work, like the change management, without the investment and interrogation of quantitative data being your HRIS data, and yes, your
Mm-hmm.
sentiment data, but sentiment data at large. and your
Mm-hmm.
benefit selections and your performance data, and being able to like splice those things, for real analysis. I as I think about like this landscape today, and I think about the budget and interest and political the capital is not there for like these large, extravagant, more theatrical things.
Your words, I love them. Come on now. Okay.
Performative, symbolic gestures. Like people just don't
Mm-hmm.
have there just isn't interest in that anymore. In the same way. Like I remember brands spending 100, 200, $300,000 for
Yes.
galas and dinners
Yes.
and to be on lists. Some of those
Mm-hmm.
some of those things don't even exist no more. Diversity, quote unquote, Diversity Inc. had a little list. That's all that stuff is gone, right? And the people,
It's
it's
gone. I
gone.
didn't even know that.
It's gone. Well,
Wow.
yeah. Listen, that's a whole nother pod. They fired
Okay.
their black CEO, and decided to, anyway, a whole mess. So the point is that these companies, they're not even spending money on that stuff anymore, right? So,
Yeah.
but here's the thing. Going back to what you said at the beginning around our conversation offline, I believe it creates more and more opportunity to spotlight the work that you're doing around actual data. So like talk to me more about, like, if you can't, like, why do you believe that like the people data analytics and insight for organizations, and like that and like data analysis is so important?
Yeah. So, gosh, I'm so passionate about this subject. I think HR is evolving and transforming to be more like what marketing and, customer voice and understanding customer experience is. And I think that that's a good thing because it leads us to do the things that need to be done versus the things that look good.
Mm-hmm.
I've been doing diversity analytics my entire career, never had it in my title because I don't like to address that from a programmatic perspective. Not that I don't think programs are important, I just don't think that they're enough. So, you know how some people say faith without works is dead?
Mm-hmm.
Well, strategy and intention without metrics for accountability is just hot air.
Well, wait, what?
And
Wait. Bring it back. Rewind. Say it again. Talk about it.
right?
Say it again, please.
You have a strategy and you have an intention, but if you have no plan to measure if you're actually accomplishing that thing or to what extent, then all you're doing is creating hot air. That's pretty much it. And I feel this so strongly that very early in my career, I came up with a process that I call the Nirvana approach. Nirvana is your vision, right? Like, what are you realistically trying to do? And I usually start this off with asking people, if you were completely successful in this context, what would that look like? What would people say about you? What would tell you that you have accomplished success?
Mm-hmm.
And work your way backwards from each success factor to an actual metric and determining for each metric what's good, what's bad, right? I think the discipline of that is lost, and it's so, so important for accountability purposes. That's number one. Number two, when you do data analysis in a really dynamic, creative way, it tells you things that you didn't know, right? So I'll give you a couple of examples. So often I have seen people look at, like the outcome of a process. Like with any organization you can think of, the people doing the work at the front line is more diverse than the people at the top, right? And we see those representation metrics all the time, but we don't, for example, interrogate the processes and dig deep into the why does that breakdown occur? Like we need to, we talk about systemic bias, but we need to be looking for systemic biases in HR processes using sound metrics and analytics. So, for example, you know, how do we determine who's a high potential? Just because somebody else said so? Didn't we talk about okay, right? So it's things like that. Or, one of the things I've been doing research on recently is employee resource groups. One of the things that we found consistently across samples is that people who do that work are disproportionately likely to be stressed comparing to people that don't. And we're seeing that's because they're doing a lot of work that goes unacknowledged, right? So when you approach this work like an organizational detective, right? Stop starting with, well, what data we have, and start with what do we need to know, right? And then figure out how to get and find that data to get you to the things you need to know so that everybody can have a positive work experience. We need to be organizational detectives out here, and it's not happening enough.
You know what the real pain, the real reality, right? I can tell we're gonna have a good time. We've already had it. We're already having a good time. But so here's the challenge, Dr. Martin, is real talk. The reason why so much of this org data, like this work, this insights work, I'm gonna call it, is under engaged even now, is because people are afraid of math and cannot read.
It's That's so funny. I presented at a conference a couple weeks ago and I talked about performance feedback data. I think some of it, honestly, is that people don't even have the hypotheses, right? So if you look at Textio's data, for example, and I am a great proponent of that, that research is out there and I love it. And one of the things they find is that people of color get less feedback. Now, there are a variety of different ways you can look at that, but one of the ways is counting words. That's it. That's it. And when I said that at this conference, I literally said, now who can't count words? But nobody ever said to us, you know what, this might be something that you want to look for, right? So I think it is, people hear analytics and data and they get scared and they think that it's something they can't do.
Right.
And they don't think about simple things they can do. And then number two, it's up to researchers like me to say, hey, this is what we found. Let's share it with the world. Is that happening in your organization? That is our approach at Workhuman, right? So this is my role. We do thought leadership research. We send out surveys to just regular working people, not our clients. And we ask about things that we think are important, like psychological safety, engagement, employee resource groups. And then we take that independent research and we go to our clients and we say, hey, look what we found. Is this what's happening in your organization? And oh, by the way, we got some objective data for you because you're a client. Things like data from our recognition system or from our conversation system that we can help you with. If you share data with us, we can help you get some much needed insights about employee experience in your organization. And I'll tell you one more thing. I've started to talk about this in a slightly different way, right? Because it's hard right now. Sometimes people don't want to hear about inclusion or equity, not our clients because they're the best, but some people.
Yeah.
And so I started to talk about it like untapped potential. Because if you think about it like this, if you hire somebody and you're paying them good cash money to do that job and they're not getting the feedback they need to do their job properly and to grow in your organization, you're leaving effort on the table. Point blank, period.
I mean, 1,000%. I I want to go back to something that you said like earlier, which is like good analysis and insight tells you things you didn't know before. And
Yes.
I also agree that a lot of times when people engage data, they look, it's almost like they go in to your point. Well, we only have this data, so we can only show this much. And it's like,
Right.
well, wait a minute. What is it that you need to know? Like, what are you trying to understand? And even
That's
like,
right.
but I also, what has been so interesting to me, and I'm thinking about even before I was doing this at Living Corporate, because I really cut my teeth in all this work as a part of doing merger and acquisition engagements at PricewaterhouseCoopers, right? And so what we would do is we would take their org data, and I'm like, whatever the case may be. And they say, well, we only got, they would say, oh, because these are, every client is different, but it's like, we only have race and gender representational data. We have hierarchy. We have a department, but we don't have race. And we don't, they would say all the things that they do not have. Mm-hmm. And say, well, let's just take what you have first from all these different places, and let's bring them together and just look at it like together. And I'm telling you, exactly. 9 times out of 9, people were blown away because they were like, oh, we never thought about it. And it's like, to your point about like having a hypothesis, or just even like having the attitude of curiosity and being open to think about things. I think, to your point, like people think about data. They even think about the organization as like too much of a mess to understand. Right. So when you talk to them, and I'll say, okay, well, like so many of the clients that we talk, like our prospective clients and current clients, say, yeah, we have this data, but it's like in this other system over here, or it's in this other system over there, as if like that means you can't do anything. And it's like, well, no, if right. you have it, we can do something with it, right?
Yes. So I have so much to say to that. One of the best projects I ever did in HR was something that, required me to put data sets together. The day I learned about Snowflake, I was like, wait, I'm sorry, what? Which is, a data aggregator, yes, right? Yes. So that was really, really cool. And, sometimes you have to, like I said before, and like you echoed, start with a question. So often people ask me, what do you need in order to be successful in analytics? And they're surprised when I say curiosity.
Come on.
Curiosity. It is the most underrated skill in this endeavor today, especially if we have so many tools we can now use. The availability of natural language processing, even word clouds, like, oh my gosh, it's easy to do a word cloud now, right? Even things in meetings like, who's more likely to speak? We have all the tools to answer those questions now, but you've got to get good questions.
You got to get good questions. And so like 100% on the curiosity. And I'll also say, like, in the spirit of, and out of respect to like your realm of expertise, it's also having the right people engaged with asking the right questions, not only interrogating the data, but then also like building out the surveys to capture various sentiment.
Yes.
It's also, though, about having the right people who understand and can connect the dots between quantitative data, like data sets, and like understanding organizational behavior. So like your background is so fire because like I remember this one time, I'm not going to say the client name. Well, no, it's been enough time. So when I was at PwC, we did an engagement, like we did one of these M&As for Berkshire Hathaway. Okay. And Berkshire Hathaway, they have mad people. So, and they have huge data and analytics teams. And, so we were like, okay, well, and at the time it was just me and my man, Mike. And Mike is now the head of Insight Information at Living Corporate. And we were just like 2 guys. And they were like, well, I mean, we have a data team. We get out, and I'm like, yeah, but like, just let us see the data. And they said, wow, we're really actually pretty surprised. We didn't know, like, we wouldn't have thought to like, or even arrange the data this way to even get these points of information, get this point of insight. And so it's not just enough to say, okay, well, I have this data scientist or I have this analyst.
That's right.
It's about having the right people who exist in both worlds of people, experience, and org and change, as well as someone who understands. Because like, like I can't tell you how many times people be like, oh, we have our own dashboards and stuff. And you see it and it's like 62 PDF slides of like 3D pie charts. Bar graphs.
You make me snort.
You know what I'm talking about too. Stuff look fugazi.
I do.
It looks really bad, and it's like, and they'll tell you it's, and I'm like, man, like, it's like it's like we're in the 2020s, right? Like this looks like something we would have put together back when I was in high school on a floppy, and so. And I graduated in 2008. My school was poor, so we still had floppy disks. But the point is that, it's about having it's because there's an art and a science, I believe. That's right. To insights work, right? That I think that is.
I agree with you.
It's really underappreciated and underestimated. So let's keep on going. So
Wait. I want to say something about that too.
please.
The future of this work, to what you said, is multidisciplinary. And that is why my Workhuman analytics team is the most favorite I have ever worked with. We've got linguists, we've got data scientists, we've got natural language processing experts, social psychologists, experimental psychologists, IO psychologists,
Wow.
statisticians, like all kinds of people. Because you're right, you need to blend them all. And oh, by the way, we don't all look the same.
Mm-hmm.
We don't all have the same background.
Mm-hmm.
So I think as we're doing this work in the excuse me, in the future, we need to get really intentional about that. Economists, or people who have studied consumer behavior to help us think about profiles in the workplace. We have to think outside of this box that we've created for ourselves, I think.
Yes, I think also it's like people when they think about data and I think that people in the data space can make this mistake as well as people outside make this assumption is like, look, the ultimate goal, to you said earlier, is curiosity. Like you go in with curiosity, but guess what? When you're ending, you're also ending with curiosity.
Yes.
The power of really strong insights work is that you now have more pointed questions that you're seeking
Yes.
answers to. Right? So like
It's true.
I think about like some of our clients. I think about some of our clients where these are like multinational brands. And we might have we have sentiment surveys and HRS data sets from all these different places. And I akin it to like a smoke detector. So it's like, look, where there's smoke, people say, well, there's smoke, there's fire. Well, where there's smoke, sometimes it's just smoke. So
Yeah.
you don't,
Like when I was blow drying my hair last
when
night,
you
I
blow
set off
dry
the
your-
smoke
like when you
detector.
was blow
There
drying
was
your
no
hair last
fire.
night, real talk.
I did.
And like when I was, like yesterday, I was cooking some eggs and I wasn't paying attention, got a little too hot, smoke detector went off, but it wasn't, nothing was on fire. And so like,
Right.
I think that like to that end, it's, you do this work and the data may lead to may suggest certain conclusions, but I think it's important and I think it's empowering to our clients when we say, hey, here's what we're seeing. We're not making a definitive point conclusion. However, we have some questions. This may be worth you interrogating. So like,
Yeah.
I think so often, and you think, look, there's ego and pride and everything. Some of these executives, some of these leaders, they've been a part of their organization for 15, 20 years. They struggle to imagine that you not working here at all, just looking at numbers, could tell them something they don't necessarily know. Now, they're not going to say that out loud to you,
Yeah.
but they expect to kind of not be surprised. And so the power to say, hey, we're empowering you with more information so that you can continue to be curious as you have this conversation with the accounting department or the engineering department or whatever the case is. But it's just that now when you go in with these questions, now when you go in with your point of curiosity, we're sharpening those questions so you can maybe get even further and save some more time. And I think for us,
love
that framing for us has been helpful.
Yeah, because I think, you're never really done in this work, right? So that's why I love my role in the fact that we have an ever evolving research agenda because also the context changes. I think what's really important too, and one of the things I've learned along my career, is to remember that when you're presenting analyses, to present it in the format of humanity. There's somebody I work with who, says to me, one of my colleagues, she says, never forget that each data point represents a person and a story, right? And so one of my favorite research projects is one we did with Black men in tech, because we had the data, right, and the results, but we attached them to real stories. And I found that when we present data that way and we make it human, that's what really motivates people to take action on what we're presenting.
That's a beautiful
And I
thing.
think that leads to the additional curiosity, right? Because I think humans are naturally curious about other humans. And so if we present it that way, then you want to know what comes next in this story. Why is it this way? So I think those things go together.
No, we 100% agree. And I think it's interesting too, because like to that point, I can't tell you, especially like after the murder of George Floyd, and there are more and more reports, DEI reports and things like that being done.
Mm-hmm.
And so I am not a IO psychologist or any type of psychologist. However,
Okay.
I am a black man, and black people
Yeah.
and black Americans, this is black people around the world. We have a genuine understanding of white folks in ways that I think is underappreciated. And
Yeah.
what I find interesting in corporate spaces is sometimes white leadership and people in power, they posture and are like pre-defensive. So like, and I've seen that in data report outs. So what I mean by
Mm-hmm.
that is like, let's say you have a report and it says 80% of of no 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 yeah 80% of black women feel feel supported at work, right?
Uh-huh.
Let's say you say
Okay.
that. They would say, well, 80% feel supported at work. Like, that's great. And it's like, okay,
Uh-huh.
well, what about
But what yeah.
these 20%?
Uh-huh.
Or they frame bad, they frame things almost always in the positive. Hey, 46%, no, 53%, yeah, 53% of all black employees feel as if they have effective sponsorship at work. The majority of black employees feel like they have sponsorship at work. And it's like, well, wait a minute. Like,
Yeah, I think one of the hardest parts of this work is that people in non-marginalized communities want to feel like the world is a just and good place in which to exist. And in a way, I don't blame them for that. But also,
it's
I
a nice
have
way to
that.
think.
It is a nice way to think. It is a luxury and a privilege, actually, right? And so I do see that all the time. The other thing I see, and I'll tell you a specific story.
Mm,
I love employee engagement surveys. I do. I've done them my entire career. I think that people should always be listened to. But I also think that it's not enough. And here's why. So I remember we did some research with Gallup and looking at recognition experiences for different types of people. And we found that Black employees were Black and Hispanic employees were the least likely to say that they felt that they were being equitably recognized compared to their coworkers.
hmm
So we were doing media on this, right? Like it's a press junket, you sit in one chair, the news stations come in and out, and you have all these different interviews at the same time.
hmm
And I will never forget, I don't even remember which news station it was, but the news reporters, two of them, a man and a woman, both white, said to me, "So why do you think they feel that way?"
why do you think?
And this is what happens with engagement surveys as well. People say, "Well, why is that the perception?" And this is why different data sources are so important, because I was able to say, well, we actually have data from our system that shows that this is the case. And so they feel this way because it is that way. I've
Right.
seen the same dynamic play out in performance feedback, right? So people, employees of color will say on the employee survey, they'll be less likely to say they get meaningful feedback. But
Mhm.
until you actually get the performance review data, it's a perception and not accepted as a reality.
Right. Right. I mean, and I was sharing that story to say this idea of like not putting people to these numbers, right? So if you say, well, the majority of this feel this way, or 70% feel this way, and it's like, hey, I recognize that you're saying that let's say it's a slim majority or a more
Yeah.
significant majority. This 30% or 47% or whatever, this other group that you're like kind of ignoring in your like in your positive toxic kind of
Hmm.
whitewashing of it,
I was about to say
it's
that.
like that represents like hundreds of people or thousands of people, or
Yeah.
and so like and not only that, it represents, and since let's just let me be pessimistic and say, if you don't care about humans, that represents X amount of market that you're trying to engage. Like if there was if
Yeah.
that's your sales team, that's your products
Yeah.
team, that represents X amount of hours of labor.
Yeah.
That represents something operational to your
Oh, for
brand.
sure.
And so like it's
Hmm.
important to like be thoughtful about these numbers and like not present it almost like this, again, something to like be pre-defensive about. I think
Hmm.
so often I think so often in this space historically, like there's almost this idea of, well, if we don't present it bad, we're not accountable to it, right? Well, hey, I don't want to look at it because I'm sure you've heard this before. Like you talk to leaders and they say,
Yes.
well, I can't look at the data because if I look at the data, I'm accountable for it. Guess what?
We'll have to do something about it.
We'll have to do
Yeah.
something about it. Guess
Yeah.
what, buddy? You work there, so that's crazy. That's like what, like when they say that, I'm like, that's like me being like, that's like me saying like, so again, we talked about like the twins that my wife and I are expecting in a couple months, but then like also I have two kids right now, right?
Hmm.
So I'm accountable to making sure my children are safe.
Hmm.
Period. Like it's not like I have to pay attention. It's on me to look at. It's not like, oh well, hey, if my daughter, my oldest daughter Emery, my oldest let's say she has a cough. Well, I don't want to take you
Hmm.
to the doctor because if I take you to the doctor, then I got to give you some medicine. What? That makes no
I also think
sense.
there's more fundamental at play here, and this is a hot take, so get
Come
ready.
on.
I, we've done ourselves such a disservice by making the racist the big bad wolf,
Hmm.
right? Because what's happened is it's turned into something that no good person wants to be, right? And so that means that people, to me, are less likely to want to admit that they've done something that wasn't quite cool because they don't want to be a bad person, right? And it affects their self view that they are a good person.
Hmm.
Instead of thinking about it like, cognitive shortcuts and biases are part of human wiring, and we just have to be extra self aware and careful, right? It's like looking both ways when you cross the street. If we talked about it in those terms, I think more people would be open to not only individual missteps, right? But also to things like, yeah, that's not what it should be, right? It's because they don't want to be the racist person or the racist organization. It's really a blocker to improvement, unfortunately.
We agree. I think that, and again, like even if we're just talking about just the business of work, it's like, hey,
Hmm.
look, like we gotta, what's happening here? Let's have some honest conversations
Hmm.
about what this is, so that we can fix it, so we can be more efficient.
Hmm.
Hey, like
Yeah.
we're not having real conversations, and it's creating negative experience with our employees, which then creates negative experience with our customers, which then impacts our ability to go to market. Like
Right.
it's so at a certain point somebody has to be willing to have those conversations if you actually still want to be competitive and innovative in the market. I
Hmm.
mean, you know,
Hmm.
I cannot. So going back again to the top of this discussion, yes, I'm so excited about. And it's funny because I was when we first met, and I was like in a real spicy mood, and I was like, you know,
I remember
all
that.
these little events, all these da da da, Martha's Vineyard and Jack and Jill, and people with Trevor
I
Noah. Then I
remember.
go on Workhuman and I see, oh, Trevor Noah, one of y'all speakers at the Workhuman
I
Live.
told you. And listen, you cannot come for Trevor
I'm not coming
because
for Trevor.
I
I'm not coming for Trevor.
love
I
Trevor.
love Trevor. I love Trevor. Trevor is like Trevor Noah. Like I'm gonna get him on the pod one day. His people are hard to reach, and salute to Trevor's people because he has good management. He's doing well. He's doing great. But but I think that I think my larger point is just it's now time, right? I think like the people that were maybe kind of relegated to the to behind the scenes or kind of
Hmm.
dismissed. I think like they are more positioned now to like make a serious impact and have a much larger voice
Hmm.
to really create impact, because even if you are the most virulent racist or the most homophobic person or whatever, like let's say you are a bad person, you know you're a bad person, and all you care about is the bottom line. Well, you still need to understand your data, and like, and
Mm-hmm.
we have these conversations all the time. Now, thankfully, part of having your own company is deciding who you will and won't work with. But by the grace of God, we don't really have people like that.
Mm-hmm.
I will say is, I'll say, hey, look, irrespective of like where you are on the political spectrum, do you want to know as much as you can about your business or not? Like,
That's right.
that's
That's
it.
right. And you want the people you hire to be engaged, and to do the work that you've hired them to do. So, I was just preparing a talk for Workhuman Live Forum, and one of the things I'm going to talk about is conservation of resources theory. And what that means is your emotional cup needs to be filled before you can focus outwards.
Mm-hmm.
And we see that in the research when we look at things like, the relationship between recognition and patient satisfaction. We find that feeling like you belong, right, is in the middle of those things. It's like once you take care of an individual's individual needs, then they can, give energy outwards. Like that is basic and fundamental. That's not even really DEI. Now, when it becomes DEI, is when you have a certain segment that are more likely to feel like they don't belong,
Mm-hmm.
right? Like this is all connected, but at the end of the day, those people are still in your workforce and you're losing something
Mm-hmm.
by not addressing those things.
Now, first of all, we got to have you on parts. I got to talk about. I got to talk. We got to have conversation offline about Workhuman because I do believe there's
Yes.
some synergies there. But for the sake of this conversation, I want to put on my, as we wrap up, I want to put on my my Nostradamus hat. I want to talk about.
Oh dear.
I want to talk about where my concerns are that like work is going. So
Okay. All right.
so like as you look at like today's political landscape and you just look at like the
I
current.
try not to be honest.
I hear
you
you.
know.
No, I feel you. The
Yeah,
internet is just it feels like information is just everywhere all the time. It gets a bit overwhelming. But what I think
it
about
does.
what I think about is like worker protections continue to be stripped away, like eroded away. Right, I'm not gonna say stripped. They've been
Hmm.
they're getting so
Okay.
in terms of like okay, like we're seeing like increasing space for and desire for less growing less regulation. Regulation has been decreasing in the United States since like the 70s.
Hmm.
Unions have continued to get weaker. We're
Hmm.
seeing like bills and laws to push right to work to be almost like this federal thing where like every state's going to be right to work and like so we're seeing like these
Hmm.
bills being proposed. We're seeing really honestly think about like anything that is like pro worker protection or balance
Yeah,
be eroded. We're seeing like there was a senior executive I think at Google who said 60 hours a week is like the sweet spot,
I saw
right? And
that.
it's like, yo,
I
I
saw
remember there were
that.
like whole protest people. There was like whole riots for people died for us to work 40 hours a week. And so I say all
Yeah.
that to say it's like I think my anxiety, one of my several anxieties, because I struggle with anxiety, is this idea of a, an ever growing more informed workforce
Hmm.
powered by data like Workhuman
Hmm.
provides and Living Corporate
Hmm.
delivers and blah 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 running up and into and against institutions that are looking to be increasingly extractive. And I'm not really
Yeah.
sure like where the dust is going to settle with that because like
Yeah.
to your point earlier about the ERGs, yes, I'm not surprised at all. The data would show that that if you work at ERG, that you're gonna be more stressed because ERG is oftentimes unpaid labor, and it comes with a bunch of political landmines you're stepping on, getting in trouble, and you still are pressured to do your day to day job and keep it in a
Yeah.
landscape where people get laid off all the time. So like,
Yeah. If you do it wrong, yeah. Our best clients look at it as like a leadership development kind of thing, which, I think that there's some great potential there. My one of my gifts is that my imagination is audacious.
come on,
And yeah, and I hope for things that I actively work towards, and here's what I hope for.
Hmm.
So I feel like we might be a really good compliment because you're probably more practical. Like, this is what's gonna, like the cynic, and to an extent, I am that too. But I'm also, an idealist, and
Hmm.
I hope for a day when we don't ever need unions. This
Hmm.
is what I hope for because the reason why we need things like that is that people have to fight for things,
Hmm.
right? And I'm hoping that there will come a day when we have a group of leaders of businesses that understand that it is mutually beneficial to the business, to the employee, to the societies they live in to treat people well. That is deep in my heart, the hope for the future of work. Is it practical? I don't know. But
But
I keep working to make that a
but
reality.
we no, but to your point, we need that because you're right, and you're right.
Yeah.
We are a really good balance because my response to that would
Hmm.
be we will always need unions because the very nature of capitalism is conflict and fighting. But you're right. Like I would love for there to be a world where there's just a recognition like hey, there's a different way for us to
Yeah.
share and work without someone
Yes.
having to be exploited. Like
Yeah.
there's actually like the funny part about it is, and again, this is part two, but I'm gonna just say this and then we'll give you space to plug. We'll go. Is like our late stage capitalism right now is so late stage that
Hmm.
we don't actually we're not I'm not even talking about necessarily changing a system. I'm just saying
Hmm.
like there's so much frosting on this cake. Can you just like give some of the frost? Can you just like you don't actually have
Yeah.
you're not actually like losing anything,
Yeah.
right? Like that's the crazy part about this landscape today is like, man, like people keep on it's like and I've talked about this now like all year, but like layoffs have become like a business function. Like
I
when
know it
I
shouldn't
graduated from
be.
college and all the way back in 2011, a layoff was like when something bad happened.
Right.
like
Right.
if you
Right.
laying off
Right. Right.
people, there was a serious like miscalculation or failure, right?
Yeah.
And now it's like, no, laying off people is just, hey, we committed our shareholders that we were going to get 3%. Right now we're at 2.78%, and if we lay off 9% of our workforce, we'll be at 3.2%. So we'll outperform, and then we'll get more money. And it's like, damn, but like that's not a sustainable way to like do
No. And we
anything.
did some research on that, right? Like the people who are left behind, right? And the people that you decided you want to keep, now they want to leave and they're ticked off. So actually, it's not something that you should do all willy nilly like that. Also, I want to wear my bias on my sleeve. This is a very hard conversation for me because I'm an immigrant, you
Mm-hmm.
know? And when people choose, like I didn't immigrate because my parents came here. I came by myself at 16, right? So I am the immigrant.
Mm.
And for us, the American dream has a certain place in our hearts, right?
Mm.
Like the land of opportunity. And so, there's some things that I need to reconcile there.
Mm.
But I definitely agree with you that this willy nilly jump straight to layoffs should not be the answer. And it incurs more cost than you would think. I'm also talking to some of our clients right now who are using data on things like skills to redeploy people instead of laying them off. And I think that that is so brilliant.
Yes,
And it's those things, those stories, those actions that give me hope that things will get better.
absolutely. Look, Dr. Mar, we can talk all day. I could tell. I'm gonna be respectful of your time.
Thank you.
Please, we're releasing this. We're releasing this like in the next. We're releasing this very soon. So
Okay.
so plug what you got going on. Where can people learn more about you? The
Woo.
work you like. I'm gonna give you space. Do your thing.
Okay, so first of all, connect with me on LinkedIn, Misha Ann Martin, MEI, S as in Sam, HA-ANN, because I am always doing the most. Coming up is South by Southwest, three different panels, two at Ireland House on 6th Street. You don't have to have a badge. If you're local, come say hi. We are talking about how AI can complement instead of replace the human and helps us connect with each other as humans if you do it right. If you're in London, come check me out Wednesday, March 19th at Workhuman Live Forum, and I will be talking about the fundamentals of how you treat humans well at work and how that helps the human, helps your business, helps economy, helps the society. I will be talking about employee resource groups with the ERG Homegirl. We have a webinar coming up, and then we will also be presenting together at Workhuman Live in Denver in May. 25% off right now. So come say hi.
It's Dr. Meisha Ann Martin, senior executive, leader, speaker, presenter, facilitator, coach, mentor, all things dope. At Workhuman and beyond. It's been a pleasure. We look forward to talking to you soon, Dr. Martin.
The pleasure has been mine. Community has been my word for 2025, and it is such an honor to be in community with you. Seriously, I appreciate it.
Thank you. We'll talk soon. Peace.
All right.